Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. My name is Angela Rose, and I'm sitting in for Al McFarlane today on The Conversation. We are going to have fantastic two folks, Rinal Ray here today, as well as James Garrett Jr., and we're going to be discussing issues of homelessness, architecture, design, and the future of our community. But we're going to actually also want to let you know to subscribe to the YouTube channel. So wherever you are listening to this, go to your YouTube and also subscribe at Insight News MN. And so you'll be able to receive notifications when we are live. We are going to jump into our hot topics today. Some of these are kind of serious. The first one being an officer who held back the crowd during George Floyd's murder, is convicted of aiding and abetting manslaughter. So the ex-officer Tao, convicted of aiding and abetting George Floyd's manslaughter murder, former Minneapolis police officer who held back the bystanders while Derek Chauvin and his colleagues restrained a dying George Floyd, has been convicted of aiding and abetting this manslaughter. Tou Thao, who already had been convicted in federal court of violating George Floyd's civil rights, was the last of the four former officers facing judgment in state court for Floyd's killing. He rejected a plea agreement and instead of going to trial, let the Hennepin County Judge Peter Cahill to decide the verdict based on written filings by each side and evidence presented in previous cases. His 177-page ruling was released Tuesday. Tao's actions were not authorized by law, and there is proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Tao's actions were objectively unreasonable from the perspective of a reasonable police officer when viewed under the totality of the circumstances. This is what Judge Cahill wrote. And then Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison said the conviction of Tou Thao is historic and the right outcome. It brings one more measure of accountability in the tragic death of George Floyd. Accountability is not justice, but it is a step on the road to justice. And that was Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. And then the defense attorney, of course, of Robert Poole did not immediately return. And then also we have the hot topic of federal asset tax would impose another barrier to building wealth. President Joe Biden's budget proposal for 2024 is out and it has some unfortunately familiar pitfalls. The president's plan again calls for a federal asset tax. This misguided policy would set countless of American families back in their efforts to build a better life for themselves and for future generations. Communities of color should be especially wary of a tax that at its core is a barrier to the American dream. So both of these articles are going to be found at insightnews.com. Feel free to go to insightnews.com to read those articles. Another hot topic is the UN was in town. The expert mechanism for law enforcement and racism was in town yesterday, and they heard testimony from Black community members in Minnesota who experienced police violence, right? Lost loved ones to police violence. Tashira Garraway from Families Supporting Families Against Police Violence organized this, as well as Lucina Kay from Atlas of Blackness. These two organizations also covered juveniles, formerly incarcerated juveniles who were held in solitary confinement and experienced torture while they were in solitary confinement by the hands of their officers, correctional officers. So the UN was in town, and hopefully that this will go into a report and reach a level of geopolitics where the US will be held accountable for their actions and the racist policing tactics in Minnesota and in the US broadly. Lastly, I would just like to shout out that although you cannot see it fully today, I am wearing all Black brands. I am wearing Telfar, Black brand based out of New York. And, I really am a large supporter of Black designers and Black brands. So if you are on the lookout, Telfar was also noted in a Beyonce song. So sometimes their bags do sell out, but they have a lot of performance wear that I also love as well. But those are the hot topics for today. Let's go into the main event, the interviews. And so our first person that we have today is Rinal Ray. And I'm very excited to bring in Rinal Ray, who is the Chief Executive Officer at People Serving People and is a nonprofit leader, public policy professional, teacher, trainer, and lawyer. And as the first generation of an American Indian family, she understands developing a child's cultural identity in early childhood is extremely important because implicit bias can start showing up in 6 months and start manifesting by the time a child is 3 years old. Ray believes in order to effectively abandon these systems, we need to utilize the power of love. She believes that love is the strongest public good in order to approach your life and with the intention of being anti-racist and advancing public policy to make it more equitable. So let's bring in Ray. Hello, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you, Angela? It's great to be with you.
So well. Yes, thank you so much for giving us your time today and, sharing with folks in the community the work that you do. So first, what is People Serving People and what was your journey to becoming the CEO of such an important organization?
Sure thing. So at People Serving People, we exist to see families thrive. We, as a team, hold a vision of healed families and transformed communities. And every day, our team works to prevent the experience of family homelessness. And we do this through programs like our early education program, our K-12 program, through one-on-one advocacy. And we do this also through issue and systems advocacy as well. So that's our prevention piece. And as long as family homelessness exists in our region, we will be here to provide shelter and meet families in the moment of their housing crisis. So in addition to 99 rooms of shelter in our building that I'm sitting in downtown Minneapolis, we provide 3 meals a day, a safe and secure building, and wraparound services and supports to help a family get back into stability through a whole family approach. So my journey to becoming the CEO is not a very linear one. I am the oldest of 4 in an immigrant family, and I grew up in the Chicago area. And growing up, family as they would arrive in the U.S. stayed with us. And so I have the experience of knowing what it means to host people, to host family until they get on their feet and stable and are able to move off into homes and lives away from us and on their own. So that was a very formative early experience for me. I ended up in Minnesota over 20 years ago to go to college and ended up doing work in community afterwards, which gave me an idea of what is possible for my impact, how I can utilize my skills for the community that I live in. And I went to law school. I'm a lawyer by training and kind of fell into public policy work when I finished and was able to understand a little bit more how the laws that I learned how to interpret and learned how we're enforced get crafted. So that was a really formative experience for me as well. And at some point, I got really curious about how we can do systems change work differently, how we can do it really rooted in the perspectives, ideas, and solutions of people directly impacted. And that's honestly what led me to People Serving People. It's about 5.5 years ago. The organization was interested in shifting into that way. And it was an opportunity for us to do that together as a human service organization, as an organization working with people in the midst of this crisis, to learn from them, because they know exactly where the problems are. They know where systems didn't work for them. And they are the key to the solutions and the ideas that we get to help them advance.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very crucial that we recognize how laws and policies shape and create realities for people, right? And homelessness is a current reality that seems to be increasing exponentially in recent years in Minnesota. So, what is the demographic of homelessness population in Minnesota? And I also just, again, say that it's to point out again that the law and public policies shape these realities.
That's right.
Yes, exactly. Go ahead. So what's the demographic of a homelessness population in Minnesota?
Yeah. And I can't speak to all of Minnesota. What I can share with you is our experience of people serving people across Hennepin County as a family shelter. So there's folks who work and know the data around singles much better and around youth. So I'll speak to families. So we have seen a dramatic increase in the number of people needing prevention support and needing shelter over the last year. And we saw this increase going up really fast around the end of the evictions moratorium last year, around the end of when pandemic supports dropped away, around when the child tax credit ended at the federal level. When all of that was happening, we were seeing an increase in inflation. And there was a particular impact around increased inflationary on the rental market, making it much harder for folks to move into rental units that they could afford on their own. So that's led many more families that were at the edge over into that experience of homelessness. So last night, thanks to a colleague, I know that we had 278 people in shelter with us at People Serving People alone. The majority of the folks in shelter with us are children, and the average age of our kiddos here is 7. It's a very young, vibrant, fun, laughter-filled, and sometimes tears building. The average length of stay with us is 78 days. Sometimes families are with us much longer, and sometimes families are with us much shorter. 93% of our families identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. So I just want to pause there for a minute, because that is not the makeup of our broader community. It is not the makeup of Hennepin County. Families of color are very much overrepresented in the experience of homelessness in our region. And what I can tell you beyond those numbers and what we know as folks who are in this space every day is that the parents in our buildings are strong, they're resilient, and they're working extremely hard to get on their path to stability. The kids in our building, they're bright, they're curious, they're full of energy, and everybody in this space wants to support them in their growth. So that's just a little bit about what's happening in our space. I can tell you that in Hennepin County, at some point, and currently we are over capacity for the number of families that need shelter. So we're an overflow as a county system around supporting families in their experience of homelessness.
Mm-hmm. What's unique about, people serving people and supporting families? What are the unique aspects of needing to support families that you guys are instilling at People Serving People?
Yeah, so in our over 40 years of working, we've learned that education and homelessness are absolutely intertwined. As others have said, there is no homework without home. In our education team, along with the other wraparound services and supports that we provide, our education team in particular, we offer 3 amazing programs to support families in their experience or families that are at the edge of homelessness. So we've got 3 programs. I'll just share with you a little bit about them quickly. So we have our Center of Excellence, which is located in the Elliott Park neighborhood just down the street here. It's a 4-star parent-aware rated program. We have a healing-centered curriculum. We focus on social emotional learning and executive function. And we're really fortunate to be a part of the Greater Twin City United Way's 80 by 3 initiative and have the opportunity through that to work with other similar centers. On site at the shelter for families that are staying with us, we have another 4-star NECPA accredited early learning center. We work with babies as young as 6 weeks all the way through kindergarten. And the curriculum here is really tailored around the average length of stay. And we do this work in partnership with the parents and with all the other providers, including early childhood special education. McFarlane comes and does some music therapy work with our kiddos. It's really beautiful. And then for our school-age children, we have after-school connection, enrichment, and homework help through our K-12 program. And we've just started to do a very popular teen night a few times a month. So these are all high quality, culturally responsive, and healing centered educational offerings. And it's a whole family approach. So this 2-generational or whole family approach is designed both for parents and for children. So for parents, this means that they can work, they can go to school, they can work on figuring out what they need to do to become stable for their family and get onto their path to housing. For children, oftentimes for the first time, they're away from their parents. They're in a safe and nurturing and honestly kind of like a developmentally magical environment where we see such amazing growth in all of the different kind of indicators of early childhood development. And for us, we see early education as prevention. In the short term, access to childcare, which, in the private market is just very expensive and really hard for parents to afford, through different opportunities, early learning scholarships, childcare assistance program. We know that access to childcare can help prevent homelessness or to support a pathway out of it. Working parents, we have plenty of working parents in this building right now. They need childcare to be able to maintain their job so they can have income and be able to pay the rent. For families in shelter with us, this is really important, and they utilize our early childhood programs or K-12 programs as a source of support. And in the long term, we think about early ed as a way to help interrupt generational cycles of homelessness. We know that 80% of brain development happens by the age of 3, and that 90% of brain development happens by the age of 4. And as you mentioned up top, implicit bias starts manifesting at age 3, and children are paying attention to who they should pay attention to and internalizing messages of their own worth and belonging at 6 months. So we need to make sure that we're really doing good work to have culturally relevant and responsive care with all of the social emotional, the executive function, and the whole family supports so that our little ones can grow up and be ready for school and all of the twists and turns that life is going to throw at them. And if I can share, we have actually a really cool project right now that's working to develop an early learning curriculum that's rooted in those things that we can share across the community to other centers. And then, I think this work is not possible without the tenacity of our teachers. Their determination, their care for our families is just incredible. The leadership of our program managers, the trust of our families, and the relationships we're able to build with them, and the support of our community and board members.
Wow, that's amazing. Just the breadth of the early childhood education work that you all are doing is, very impressive. And, what are some of the other ways that People Serving People not only helps to resolve, homelessness, but you're working to prevent, family homelessness? So the childhood education is one important piece that you've mentioned. Are there any other ways, or how are you doing that work in prevention?
Yeah, for sure. I can speak to that. One of my former colleagues shared that we're like a city in our building, in our 10-story building. And there's a lot of partnerships and resources that we're able to connect families with based on what they need. But we want to make sure that families who've been with us don't come back. We want to make sure that they can stay stably housed in community, and have launched a family prevention program that builds on the strength of that relationship and the trust that families developed with us when they were with us, to provide them with resources and or support as they need it when they're in community. So that can mean, $1,000 for a car repair, or some resources to get your cell phone back so somebody can call you for that job interview. And often we found that that's really all it takes to keep a family stably housed and moving forward on their journey.
So you said your colleague calls it like a city within your building, and I've seen your shirt too.
Yes.
Is this the city? Let me see.
Yeah, so this will look familiar if you've ever driven down our building, down our street. We're on 3rd and Portland in downtown Minneapolis, right by US Bank. And this is kind of how it feels. We're like this little house in the middle of the city. And you'll often see our team in this kind of gear.
Yeah, no, and that's a part of the city that, it's interesting because there used to be folks who lived, like really lived in that neighborhood.
Mhm.
And as you said, it's near US Bank Stadium. I think some of it's been kind of gentrified, I would say is the word. But how do you deal also with the change around you happening so quickly? How are you seeing the impacts of gentrification also on family homelessness?
Yeah. So we've been in this location since 2000. And when we moved into this spot, the neighborhood looked really different. Like out my window, I see some new construction going up, and that's how it's honestly seems to have been. Certainly in my last 5 years here, there's a new building going up every year. So the neighborhood has really shifted and changed, and we've been here and we've been a constant presence. So we do some work around making sure that the neighborhood knows who we are, what we do, who our families are, that our families are very much a part of this community and a very important part of this community as well. And as it feels right and as is appropriate, we invite them into our space as volunteers. And we want to make sure that we're doing that with a lot of care. And we're doing that in a way that feels right for our family. So there are some shifts that we've made over the years to make sure we're being more centered in our guest voices and perspectives, and making sure that any relationships we're building have some reciprocity as a part of them. So we do. That said, we need volunteers, right? So we serve 3 meals a day. Volunteers are very key for that. We have volunteers in our K-12 program, and I just see that Grow Together popped up. So in addition to volunteers, we need support for our programs. So this week we are celebrating this work of our Grow Together campaign, our early education program. And the whole idea is that we need to develop some strong roots for a bright future. So you can learn more about it through our website at peopleservingpeople.org. And through that website and through this opportunity, you can kind of get a peek into our early learning programs, which I shared a little bit about, meet some of our incredible educators and our wonderful parents, and witness the connection that forms between them, and see some of our very sweet babies on some of these videos. Our goal this week is to raise $20,000 to support these really important education initiatives so that we can all grow together. We really believe that when those who are furthest from access have the opportunity to get what they need, that we all do better as a result of that. So it's about our little kids, but this is really about all of us as well.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. How can families get a head start, when it comes to early childhood education, when it comes to, maintaining housing stability with your organization? How can we tap in as well we understand the volunteer side, but the folks who might need help, how can we tap in
Yes.
with you?
Yeah, so Hennepin County has a shelter hotline right now. So if you're a person that is experiencing homelessness or at the edge of it, or you know someone that is, if you just Google the Hennepin County shelter hotline, it'll come up. And I'm sorry, I don't have that number off the top of my head. But that's one spot for folks to get connected to resources and a way into shelter if that's what people need.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you so much, Rinal. So hang in. I have James Garrett Jr. next, but then afterwards we'll invite you back and have a fantastic conversation, culminating the two interviews. Thank you so much, Rinal, for your time. And so next we have James Garrett Jr. James Garrett Jr. is a visual artist, writer, and architect. He creatively expresses the urban condition through inspired design, and his work employs diverse media to explore complex theoretical topics from a unique ethno-experiential perspective. He artistically creates a technologically advanced, resilient design that articulates an evolving comprehension of the 21st century city. And James Garrett Jr. is of Formula, And you all might have seen some of the work that Formula have done across the Twin Cities. And I'm so grateful to have James Garrett Jr. on today.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for your time. How are you today?
Excellent, excellent. And you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I'm glad it's a little bit warm out, today. I'm
Me
in the
too.
Twin Cities. I'm in the Twin Cities, so I'm glad it's a little bit warm out.
I'm here
Um,
too. Yes, I understand that I just got back from the Dominican Republic a couple days ago, and that shock of coming back from mid 90s to mid 40s is it's a rough one.
well, we're gonna give you a warm welcome, even if the weather didn't. So, what is formula? Spelled four, the letter or the number four, RM plus ULA. If y'all want to look it up online, and you'll see it also under James's title here. So, what is formula, and what is your significance to the Twin Cities area and Minnesota as a whole?
Formula is a phonetic acronym that means form plus urban landscape articulation. And I think that is the phraseology that best express what we endeavor to do on a daily basis here in the Twin Cities. We look to serve communities that have traditionally been underserved by design professionals and potentially overlooked. We look to add value to every single project that we have the good fortune to work on. We do a lot of transit work through Metro Transit to connect people to their places of employment, their homes, in schools. And we do a lot of work with community. So we look at community centers, art centers, community education projects, anything that really adds value and helps redevelop communities of color and communities that have been traditionally overlooked and underserved.
And where did you get your passion for architecture? How did it lead you to formula? I'll just, take note, you're a Black man, and I don't know so many Black architects out here. How did you find your passion for architecture and for formula?
Yeah, well, they say some people are born with it, and I was born with it from a very early age. My earliest recollections playing with Legos and Lincoln Logs and really anything that I could stack up and make buildings and cities with. That's what I was fascinated with. And so, really, that never changed. It never faltered through life. I grew up here in the Twin Cities, although I was born in the Caribbean, in St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I grew up here in the Twin Cities. My mother is from St. Paul, and that side of my family goes back about 5 generations through the Rondo community. And I am part of the legacy of the Rondo community on the St. Paul side. So after high school, I went off to the University of California at Berkeley to study architecture. I earned a Bachelor of Art in Architecture and really focused on, I think my emphasis was really related to affordable housing and sustainable materials and methods of construction. Those were the things that I was really passionate about. Solar panels and wind turbines and alternative ways to create green energy, and then bringing it back to affordable housing so that all could be served and have affordable, stable places to grow up, like I did here in St. Paul. When I got to graduate school at Parsons School of Design, I was really interested in urban housing and real estate development, among other things. Those were some of the emphasis that I wanted to have there. Also, art integrated architecture, that became something that I'm really passionate about as a visual artist myself. How do we reconnect art and culture and that expression of community? How do we reconnect that in the built environment so that people see buildings and structures and parks and art that reflect who they are and express their hopes, dreams, aspirations, on a daily basis all around them in their neighborhood. So those were things that I learned and observed were lacking in this society. Post World War II, everything after the war became about efficiency, and it became about streamlining and sort of getting rid of any markers of individuality. And so everything became this assembly line product. Everything was a commodity, and we lost that individualism, and we lost those that ability to create buildings and places and spaces that really speak to who we are as humans. And that's something that I was really passionate about in New York in graduate school, and that I wanted to really bring back here. And that's something that it's one of the three cornerstones of the firm that I co-founded in 2002. So art, technology, and sustainability are sort of the three cornerstones that Formula is built on.
And that's really interesting also with the fact that you talk about you're from Rondo. Rondo is historically, a Black neighborhood, deep rooted Black neighborhood that was destroyed through the architecture of, I-94. And, now you're doing mass transit work and connecting back the culture, putting back the culture and art and connection and belonging in mass transit too. So could you, speak a little bit about that as well?
Yes. Mass transportation in the form of the streetcar system was what really built the city as we know it. All of the dense, successful communities, the higher value parts of town as we know them, along Grand Avenue, Uptown, all of the sort of major dense urban fabric that we are accustomed to was made possible by mass transportation. So the streetcar and the ability for folks to get around seamlessly along those streetcar lines really was what laid the foundation for the city as we know it. And again, after World War II, we got away from those fundamentals and went with automobiles and buses over trains and streetcars, and we ended up with what is called urban sprawl. So everything spreads out. You get these freeways then that are trying to connect people from these far-reaching areas. Oftentimes, the freeways were intentionally run right down the middle of the most successful Black business districts to destroy them and to force people to essentially start over. So you have a combination of redlining, and you have a where banks wouldn't lend to people in certain areas, which sort of boxed a lot of folks of color, particularly Black folks here in the Twin Cities, boxed us into certain areas. And then you had restrictive covenants that literally kept people from purchasing homes in certain areas. So it sort of determined which areas were going to be the higher value areas, and it sort of predetermined which areas were going to be sort of the leftover spaces. And then you add those together with the successful community corridors that we did have being destroyed then to run I-94 and myriad other freeways across the country. It was really a death knell for our communities from an economic development standpoint and really a cohesion standpoint. People were dispersed, they were displaced, and many have never really found that sense of community again as we've had it. And so one of the charges that we have as Formula is that we want to be a part of stitching the neighborhoods back together again. So we've been working on public transportation work for the last 15 years almost now with Metro Transit. We designed all the stations on the Green Line that connected downtown Minneapolis to downtown St. Paul along the Central Corridor. Again, it's a rail line that brings in more development dollars and more investment. It is a sign to developers that this particular right-of-way is going to be one that is going to be significant for the next 50 to 100 to 150 years again. And so that is a signal to developers to reinvest in these areas. And so It was really important that, what was destroyed, along University Avenue, parallel to 94, we could find some ways to start to bring that density back and start to bring that land value back, and really reconnect people to, again, the places of worship, their places of business, where they go to school, where they live. So we really thrived in that role. And since then, we've worked on Target Field Station, which we co-designed with a firm out of New York City. We won our first national AIA Urban Design Award with that, and our first AIA New York award for that. So that work is something that we take very seriously and we take a lot of pride in. Since then, we finished the Orange Line, which is bus rapid transit, which connects from downtown Minneapolis to the south suburbs. And we're currently working on the Purple Line, which is stalled right now, but that will connect downtown St. Paul to the north suburbs through Maplewood and White Bear Lake. And then we have another project that's probably midway through design right now in Rochester, Minnesota, along Broadway Avenue there, connecting the Mayo Clinic to the city, the larger city of Rochester. And, again, we're just looking to find ways to stitch the urban fabric back together, make things tighter, denser, more walkable. You can start to have community interacting with one another again. We want to get rid of some of the spread and the sprawl and start living in more denser, tightly knit communities, so we can start really having, those relationships and those sort of meaningful lifelong connections again, just start bringing people back together.
And Bash, keep that picture up, because that actually is right next to the University of Minnesota, right next to the Humphrey. And I'll claim that this transit station in and of itself, gave me glutes. So thank you.
We have an elevator there as well.
I'm not going to use the elevator.
Okay,
The elevator is for folks who, really need it. I'm fine. I mean, I'm fine taking the stairs, but it is a lot of stairs.
It's a lot of stairs. It is.
I understand. And I thank you so much for all of the work that you do. And I didn't fully appreciate or recognize how there were Black hands, Black minds behind some of these things that we're utilizing every day in these conversations. Transit justice, when I was in the NAACP, was a major conversation around, even the legacy of folks like Rosa Parks, right? Like, what is transit justice? What does it mean to build and stitch the fabrics of Black neighborhoods together so Black folk can get to work? Or even in the history of the Montgomery bus boycotts, that was a very crucial aspect. Is, now known as transit justice. And so, yes. And now having Black hands, Black minds behind it in Minnesota, I didn't fully appreciate the work that was being done. So I really thank you so much. What are some of the, projects that, you've highlighted on your website that you would want to, feature, more prominently, and tell us a little bit about it, how the designs, manifested into reality, and, how did they turn out, and how did they surprise you in their creation?
Yeah, well, I'll start with the few projects that aren't on the website, and I'll end with a couple that are. Some of the things that we think are really important are creating spaces and places for us to gather, for us to be able to mourn, for us to be able to celebrate, for us to be able to gather, to just be together. Those are things that have been lacking in our communities, and those are things that we are actively working to put back into our communities. So one of the projects that we're really proud of right now is our work with George Floyd Square. We were hired by the city of Minneapolis to form a team to begin doing urban design about what could that be? What is the future of that community? What does it look like from a physical standpoint? And then how can we create physical structures and physical transportation modes that can really serve people and keep people first. So we've been doing a lot of community engagements, a lot of public work there, and really interested in centering people and really keeping people connected to that place, and then still being able to work with public works, still being able to work with Metro Transit, still being able to work with public safety to be able to bring those elements together. But we're leading with people first, community first. And what do those spaces start to look like? How do they start to function? How do they start to feel? So we're working really intensely on that with a really strong team of other designers and other community folks. We also completed a garden space for Philando Castile at the site of his unfortunate murder, right there on Larpenteur Avenue, adjacent to the State Fair. So we worked with the family, we worked with community, worked with the city of Falcon Heights, for years, for many years to make that come about. And a lot of, art from Seytu Jones and other prominent artists really help tell that story. Another place that we're really proud of is the Rondo Plaza, which is in St. Paul, and that is featured on the website. And that's another one that's won a number of awards over the years. Rondo Plaza is an ode to old Rondo with sort of a tip of the cap to current and future Rondo. We were asked to work on the site of the last remaining commercial building that somehow avoided the wrecking ball when it came through to take the rest of the neighborhood. And so that building was a community a landmark for many years until it finally fell into disrepair and was abandoned and had to be demolished. And so on the site of that last standing commercial building, we were asked by Rondo Avenue Inc. To create a plaza space that would celebrate the history of the neighborhood and then also create opportunities for the future. So you can see right here, this is called the History Walk. And those yellow panels, we worked with the Historic Society to take historic photos and information about the freeway. We have huge maps that show every single home and business in the path of the freeway that was taken and destroyed. We've got the names of everyone, every family, every homeowner on Rondo Avenue at the time that lost something. And it's become quite a place of pilgrimage where, folks can come and they can see their relative, their grandparent, their mother, father, whatever, who lost property or lost something there on Rondo. They can reclaim that and they can point to that. They take selfies with it. It's very powerful. My mother was one of the people that was displaced. She was a teenager at the time. My grandparents had their house taken due to eminent domain, and that was my great-great-grandmother's home. And I believe she was the first Black homeowner on Rondo Avenue back in, I believe, 1909. So there's a lot of history. There's a lot lost. My business partner, Nathan Johnson, his grandfather and my grandfather were neighbors and friends on Rondo. Their traditional home was taken as well. You can see his children listening to Marvin Anderson, who is the founder of Rondo Avenue Inc. and really one of our community keeper of records, so to speak, and just teaching and educating the new generation about some of the really terrible things that happened, but also finding ways to celebrate the beauty of the history of our neighborhood, and then also anticipating all types of wonderful things to come. So we have event space there. We have electricity. There are concerts that take place. People do yoga in that space. Any number of things. It's programmed all summer and fall, and it's really an expression of community and a place, again, for people to gather, to mourn, to celebrate, to do all of those important things that we often don't have a chance to do together.
Yes. And, that touches on also something that you had brought up earlier around even affordable housing. So, Rondo historically had a lot of Black ownership, even Minnesota. Before in the 1930s and 40s, right, had a lot of Black ownership. in Minnesota, and that actually decreased over years through the I-94, also in South Minneapolis, I-35W, and then there was a resurgence. I think we just lost Archie Givens Jr., right? And, there's a history there too of trying to think about affordable housing and building housing for Black folks in particular. I want to also bring in Rinal too on this, on discussing some of the aspects of how the community, how folks of color, and how Hennepin County or the state is dealing with building affordable housing, and what are some of the ways that you both have seen very practically on the end of as an architect, and then also on the end of working with the county and being direct services with folks who need housing. What are some of the issues and standpoints of the fact that we are in a housing shortage? Right? Like we're in a housing crisis, a housing shortage. And, there's numbers saying 15 years behind on building how much housing we need. So yeah, I would love to hear kind of like, what are some of the things that are happening, some of the opportunities, some of the challenges when it comes to building affordable housing. I'll go to James. Why don't you take it first, and then we'll go to you, Rinal.
Thank you. Yes, I think the main challenge that we have is folks have been, they've lacked the political will to invest. Investment is the key. We have the technology, we have the brain power, we have people in positions of experience that know how to build and create housing, but we often lack that sort of allocation of resources for specific communities that are lacking the most. And again, it goes back to that history of being disenfranchised, that history of being disinvested in, that history of being redlined out of funding and financing and resources, and then that history of being displaced by freeways and other large public works activities. So really, it's about identifying what needs to happen, and then really being forceful about demanding access to the significant amount of resources to be able to really get these things done. We know how to do it. We know what to do. And it's time to actually make those investments. Yes, we are many, many years behind, but we can catch up if we have the resources allocated, the state level, the local level, and at the community level.
Rinal, what are you seeing from your vantage point?
Yeah, to what James is speaking to, we do need some political will, and I'm an optimist, and our state has an incredible budget surplus right now, and I think there's some alignment around $1 billion on housing this year. So I'm hopeful that the state can get its work done and allocate those resources for affordable housing development. Now, I think it's important to be really specific in our definitions of affordable housing. Often affordable housing is built for folks at 50% of the area median income. When I think about the people in our building, we're closer to 30% or below. And so from a policy perspective, I'm not sure that the incentives for developers is actually there to build at the 30% or below level, so folks can actually afford the places that they're staying in. So I think that's also really, really quite important to think about. So in addition to the new buildings, what can we do to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing as well, to maintain that stock for families and for people in need too?
Yeah, that's an issue that's happening also in North Minneapolis with the condemnation, condemning of homes of elders. Everyone says, okay, grandma's house has to stay in the family, but when grandma passes and you go and you do an inspection of the home, the home's crumbling. Nobody has actually foundationally taken care of the home in 20, 30 plus years. And with that too, there's at times folks say, okay, well, we're just going to sell it and flip it, but you sell it to someone and then they buy it to flip it into, a luxury, nice, big house that's way, way too much for a family. And then I see on the other end, some of the kind of affordable housing not even being geared towards families, right? Being one bedroom or studios, rather than, my understanding is that in Minnesota, you can't have like two teenagers of different genders in the same room, right? Like, like these are aspects of, if you have a boy or a girl, that's not your choice, right? But these are aspects of it, of also, since Black folk and people of color are so bordering with CPS, with all of these other institutions, that could be a difficult financial stake as well. These are all considerations into taking into building affordable housing or preserving affordable housing as we go forward. What are some of the other strategic, specific aspects of policy, of creation that we do need to also take into account when talking about affordable housing?
I'm happy to start on that one, if that's okay.
Yes.
So we know that there's a lot of different ways that families enter the experience of homelessness and come to stay with people serving people. They might have lost a job. They don't have the childcare that they need. There might have been a medical emergency. We know that across all of those indicators, folks of color, Black folks, Indigenous folks are worse off. So we're also working on figuring out, how do we disrupt some of the things upstream? How do we make sure that our staff and our families are able to earn a wage that's closer to livable wage or even a housing wage? What do we need to do to help shift policies so that that can happen at the state level, at the county level? So how do we get upstream and, in our way, disrupt the way that racialized capitalism works, so that folks can have a chance? It's a very big question and a very big topic, and I don't have the answers that I want to have. So I'm looking for smart folks to help us along on that.
And James, I understand that y'all built an affordable housing complex. Could you kind of go into what the considerations were in for that? And it was for single males, you're saying?
Yeah, one of the things that we did was we partnered with Better Futures Minnesota, who at the time had a housing component to their program. And then we also partnered together with Beacon Interfaith Housing, and we created a project called Great River Landing. And it really targeted men who have been homeless or at risk of homelessness due to prior incarceration. And it ties into the services provided by Better Futures. Better Futures has their office in this building, as well as this building was built to house the men in their program that work in their work program, their training program, and that come out of prison and homeless situations to be able to be housed in a permanent capacity. One of the big things that we did with this program is we wanted to really hear from the men themselves. We spent quite a bit of time engaging with the men that were going to live there, as well as the staff that were going to be working there. And we really listened to them and tried to create something that spoke to their very specific needs. One of those needs that we found, which was only discovered through real conversations and 4 months of engagement, was that this building was a family building. It needed to be a family building. We then talked at length every time we sat down with them about their children. And that was one of the driving forces and factors for them to stay out of the carceral system and to maintain those familial connections and familial ties. So we at once recognized that we need to be able to understand, this is not just about the men, but it's about families. We were able to manipulate the design and to change some things and to allow space for a children's play area on the second floor, which is dedicated to the kids. It has very specific lighting. It's brightly colored. That's it right there. Right now, it has a bunch of toys and games and books all over, but it's a place where kids look forward to being with their fathers and sort of reconnecting and getting that that relationship time in. We also took the theme even further outside in the back of the building. We created a children's play area, a small grass lawn where kids can kick a football around or throw a baseball around with their father. And then also there's an area for grilling and whatnot. So really gathering and community building and family building was really integrated into this building from the very beginning, as well as art. We engaged Roger Cummings from Juxtaposition Arts, who is an amazing visual artist. He also worked on the Rondo Plaza art with Setu Jones again. And we created art that had a theme that told a story that was based upon these conversations over these months and months and months, getting to know the men in the program and what their needs were and what the things that they were maybe anxious about and what things they looked forward to. And this art really encapsulated all of that and sort of re-expressed it throughout the building on each floor and then on the exterior as well at the main entry. So again, it's about being able to claim the space, see yourself in the space, see your challenges, struggles, and opportunities as well, and aspirations in the space around you. So those are things that can be done. It takes a lot of cooperation, a lot of creative partnering, but there's a lot we can do. And I feel like we're only scratching the surface. Again, funding, resources are the issue. It's not the talent, the ability, the knowledge, the know-how, the will, the desire to create this housing. We can catch up if we have the political will to put the resources on the table for the folks that actually need it.
And, I've been hearing a little bit about, I guess, private-public partnerships too, when it comes to housing, and even working with the Hennepin County or Minneapolis Public Housing, these other entities, and building public housing too. And so there's some opportunities that are happening when it comes to from the end of public housing, right? Potentially gaining and building up more public housing. But I really appreciate the fact that the both of you are also working with and dealing with the private, this aspect of nonprofit, but private. I know Aon has done some work. I've done some work in Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park. It was the Huntington Place. And so, issues of housing are also deeply interwoven into these other conversations we're having around transportation, environmental justice, economic justice, and then to, community violence and policing. Public housing has been utilized, right, as a form of hyper surveillance for Black folk in the US. And so making sure and even perpetuating medical racism and medical, issues within Black folk in the US. Like, let's be honest here. Like, I could go on a rant on how I can't say too much. My husband works in public housing, but he doesn't work in public housing in Minnesota. So I'm gonna, I was say this. But yeah, there's so many issues when it comes to health, to asthma, to all of these things. You hear of landlords, slumlords just painting over mold, right? And so it's really interesting how you've engaged the community, the voices of what they need. And that's something where it's not just a building and rent, is it?
No, we're community building. And that is, I think, the biggest deficit that we have right now. We need to rebuild our communities. And a lot of that is relationship driven, and being able to create those places and spaces where people can feel free to express themselves, to come together, to plan a better future for themselves and their families. Right now, we're disparate. We're, sprawled out, spread out. We need to come back together and build those solid, stable communities that we've had in the past. And it's going to take a lot of investment. But again, we're here. There are people that are chomping at the bit to this work. So
And Rinal, you have a last word too?
And to James's point, I think it can be a start to repairing some of that divestment that has happened in Black and Brown communities over decades, right? Like it's one step, but it's a very important step to actually listen to what people are saying they need you to do differently and then to do it.
Thank you so much. This has been such a fruitful and beautiful conversation. Thank you again to James Garrett of Formula, James Garrett Jr. of Formula, and Rinal Ray, CEO of People Serving People. Thank you to everyone who has joined. Come join us tomorrow. This is a daily show. Subscribe if you often forget about the show, but you always want to catch it. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Insight News and Men. And thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful day.